top focus. Residents in Manchester have reacted to the terror attack that had taken place at the synagogue in the city. This comes as 2 people were killed as a result of the attack which took place on the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. The attack has been described by the police as a terrorist incident, and the Greater Manchester Police has confirmed the identity of the attacker as Jihad al-Shami, a UK citizen of Syrian origin who was shot dead by police officers. Let's in fact listen in to what some of the residents of Manchester have had to say.
Yeah, I know the community very well. I'm part of the local Jewish community. I've got friends who were there. I've got somebody in my community that I know. My daughters are at school with his daughters who was injured. It was something waiting to happen. The rates of anti-Semitism in the last couple of years in this country and all over the world have grown massively. And, unfortunately, we are not surprised by what happens. It's horrific. It shouldn't have happened, but we weren't surprised that it did happen.
That ain't gonna work. Simply, my word is what's going on in Gaza, Palestine. That's why this happened. Everyone knows that. Yeah. When someone say, "Oh, someone had a personal beef, someone come in and done that," no, it doesn't work like that. It didn't happen like that. It happened because what's going on there.
All right, viewers, with that, we shift our focus away from the United Kingdom towards what's happening in the Middle East. A crew member from the flotilla that was headed towards Gaza has stated that their vessel named Summertime was forced to change course to avoid being attacked by Israeli authorities. He has stated that the vessel was diverted to the Cypriot port of Larnaca, where they were seeking support from the public and authorities. Let's in fact listen in to what this particular crew member has had to say.
We're in Larnaca for the support of the people and for the support of the government, whose I believe, like the European government, are on the side of the law and not outside of the law, to try and enforce international law and international observation of international, violation. And we have doctors, we have journalists, we have people on board who are documenting all the violation that happened in the sea. And in fact, we had to make a maneuver because we were going to be attacked and kidnapped as well. This act is an act of solidarity, so we can be together if anybody is attacked. And we have to obey the law, and nobody's above the law. Nobody have the right to be a pirate of the sea and enforce whatever they want to do. And I think we are equal. We are doing things legally. We're not violating international law. We came to Larnaca within the law of the Larnaca and the Cyprus Authority. We're obeying European law, international law. We are doing everything legal, nothing illegal. And in fact, everything that illegal that's been done against us was done in high seas in international water, and we were kidnapped.
This all comes as Israel intercepted the last remaining ship sailing to Gaza, which was part of the Sumud flotilla. Meanwhile, the interception has been met with international condemnation. Thousands of people have rallied across the world from Italy to Turkey to Bangladesh to protest against Israel's action. With us on the broadcast is Mohammed Osman, International Relations Specialist, joining us from Cairo. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've just heard what some of the activists on board one of the flotillas that rerouted to Cyprus has had to say. He emphasized repeatedly that those activists who are a part of the flotilla are abiding by international law. They're abiding by European law as well. Therefore, in your view, what are the legal consequences for Israel's actions, the fact that they stopped the flotilla in international waters? Do you think any state whose citizens have been a part of the flotilla will move the international court against Israel's actions?
Thank you for having me, Pia. Well, the short answer to your question is no. If Israel is not being held accountable for committing genocide in Gaza and killing over 66,000 people, 80% of them civilians, mostly women and children, then of course they will not be held accountable for intercepting a few boats and vessels that were making their way to the genocide-struck Gaza Strip in order to carry out a symbolic gesture of breaking the siege and presenting humanitarian aid to the beleaguered Palestinian population in Gaza. As you know, Pia, this is not the first time such an attempt has happened, even though this is the largest. This flotilla was composed of 44 vessels of different sizes, and it had about 500 or 470 activists and humanitarian workers and journalists and European members of parliament on board. And of course, it seeks to penetrate the siege and present humanitarian aid. Before that, in July, there was a boat that was intercepted and the activists were arrested. A few months earlier, one such boat was making its way to the Gaza Strip, and it was targeted with a drone strike near Malta in international waters, which of course is a blatant violation of international law. This is a civilian vessel which was targeted by military means, and it was a peaceful vessel. Of course, it was not armed. None of those people were armed. But this time they intercepted all the vessels. They arrested over 400 people, and they weren't content with arresting them. They took them to Ashdod port, where they were incarcerated, and then the Minister of National Security, Itmar Ben-Gvir, the radical right-wing Zionist member of the governing coalition and the Minister of National Security, went into the place where they were imprisoned, and he taunted them and described those humanitarian workers and activists as terrorists, and that they are getting what they deserve. And of course, those activists probably will be deported to their home countries. So I think what we have seen, Pia, is an expression of Israel's complete impunity. They can act with impunity because they can evade the consequences of their actions. They are not being held accountable. And even when measures were taken by the United Nations through the International Court of Justice to hold Israel accountable, not even to punish it, but just to call upon it to take certain measures to prevent the commission of the crime of genocide in Gaza over a year ago, what happened was Israel completely ignored the ICJ ruling and went ahead with its killing spree in the Gaza Strip, where the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant on account of the egregious human rights violations in the Gaza Strip and the violations of international humanitarian law and the commission of war crimes. What happened was the United States imposed sanctions on the Prosecutor General of the International Criminal Court and its judges, and now the court is being basically persecuted and besieged by American lawfare of some sort. So and even Francesca Albanese, the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territories, an independent expert appointed by the UN Human Rights Council with a mandate elected by the members of the council, she was subjected to unilateral US sanctions as well because of her support of the legal proceedings against Israel. So we are seeing states led by the United States who ensure that Israel will never be held accountable on account of its crimes. So I hardly doubt, Pia, that them intercepting a few civilian vessels and arresting the people on board will have any considerable consequences.
And speaking of the arrests, we're also learning that 20 foreign journalists have now been detained. That's not all. Yesterday, we found out that a Doctors Without Borders medic, an occupational therapist, was killed while waiting for a bus in Deir al-Balah. Now, the death toll is mounting. Journalists, doctors are also in the crossfire as well. What then, in your opinion, is the need of the hour to ensure that all of this ends, to ensure that a ceasefire is put in place urgently?
I think that President Trump has put a proposal on the table. And as I said before on your respectable broadcast, it is far from perfect. It's not even good. It's a very bad deal. It's a very bad proposal. However, it is reflective of the current balance of power on the ground, and it is something that could be workable. Anything that stops the bloodshed in Gaza and stops the complete annihilation of whatever is left of the Gaza Strip's infrastructure and civilian population, I think this should be taken into account, and this agreement should be taken seriously and applied, and then even further discussed during application. The most important thing is reaching a ceasefire, because as you just said, Pia, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is terrible. We have tens of thousands of deaths, and there are reports by international organizations and agencies and research centers that actually estimate that the actual death toll in Gaza might be 3 or 4 times higher than the actual documented deaths in Gaza, which means that we could be speaking in a statistic that, or figures that will surpass the hundreds of thousands. And this is very plausible given the scale of destruction of Gaza. 80% of Gaza's civilian infrastructure has been completely eradicated. 70% of hospitals and medical institutions are out of service. Hundreds of journalists have been murdered. Not even like over 200 journalists have been killed in Gaza so far, if I'm not mistaken. And this number did not even die in the Second World War. And in the Second World War, it caused the death of 70 million people. Yet, not among them 200 journalists. However, in Gaza, Israel has created a new precedent and set a new record. And of course, medical personnel are being targeted. Even UN personnel, UNRWA, the UN Refugee Relief Agency, a UN specialized agency, their personnel and their buildings and their assets are being targeted by Israel incessantly. Over 300 UN personnel, UN staff died in the Israeli war of aggression against Gaza. So as you can see, even though Israel has to be held accountable, maybe someday they will be held accountable, especially now that many countries in Europe, for example, are turning on Israel and attempting to ostracize Israel from the international community, even though they're not owning up to these measures by applying sanctions, which are the most important measure that should be taken. However, it is a move in the right path. But what is even more important than accountability at this point is ceasing the bloodshed. And this requires a ceasefire. Therefore, Israel and Hamas have to take into account Trump's settlement plan or ceasefire plan very seriously.
All right, sir. With that, I would like to thank you